The unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it, we can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. So today we are continuing with our chapter of Bendowa by Great Master Dogen. And he says, both the Buddhas and ancestors insisted upon the necessity of intense training in order that enlightenment may be kept pure, being identical with training itself. Now, intense training sounds kind of intimidating, but it doesn't necessarily mean some ascetic practice of getting up really early and sitting all day and eating very little. It doesn't mean that. For some people that's helpful, but the real intense training is a lot less visible. It's the training of the mind. Constantly letting go of our opinions and our selfish desires and all that, and turning to our true aspiration. That's the real intense training. And you don't see it, so it doesn't look like much. But actually that's what we really try to practice, more than, looking holy. And for some people that, for many people, getting up really early and not eating much and all that is helpful, but it's not really the intention. Dogen goes on, if you do not cling to training, your hand will be full of enlightenment. If you do not cling to enlightenment, your whole body will be filled with training. Training and enlightenment are one thing, as Dogen keeps saying. If we don't cling to training, our hand will be full of enlightenment. It's not helpful to think, we can train ourselves intensely and with dedication, but to think, I'm training, doesn't help. And even worse, I'm enlightened, much worse. Or to think, this is training and that's not. Or I'm training and that person isn't. Or they're training and I'm not. They're just opinions that get in our way. So we don't cling to training, we don't cling to enlightenment or ideas about training and enlightenment, as Dogen keeps saying. We just do the practice, just do the training. And sometimes we act in an enlightened way, and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we just make a mess of it. But training and enlightenment are one thing, and we just trust that. Dogen says it over and over again, you can't separate them. You can't think, am I enlightened, am I training? You just do the practice, doing our best, not clinging to our ideas of what training is or what enlightenment might be, because we've talked about that. And as Dogen says, we never go beyond the need to meditate and train ourselves. We're never so holy and so evolved that we don't need to keep doing it, whether we're new to Buddhism or we've been practicing for many years. Well, that might seem obvious that we have to keep doing it. But there's something we can learn from it, I think. Some of us are growing old. And it's very tempting to think we're too old to really train as diligently as we could when we were young. And there's a little bit of truth in this. When we're young, we have more energy. We can usually sit in meditation for longer. It doesn't hurt so much. And sometimes we may have more kind of physical enthusiasm, physical energy. Sometimes more enthusiasm for our practice, but not always. Not always. Because getting older has benefits as well. We're not so pulled around by our desires, and I want to do this and I want to do that. And of course, if we've been training for a long time, ideally, we've become more flexible, less attached to our ideas and opinions. This is not always the case. Sometimes we get more hardened in our views, but never mind. Try to let go of our ideas, our opinions, and be softened, flexible with our years of training. This is what we're trying to work on. And when we're older, we have to slow down a bit. That's a good thing, Helps us to be more still and to pay more attention. We're not just rushing hither and yon. And if we're old, we know that we might not have a whole lot of time left. And we need to keep this in mind. We don't have time to waste. And this is really helpful, because it's always the case. No time to lose, says Pema Chodron. It's always helpful to bear in mind. Do not waste time. Keep on doing it. And when you're getting older, it becomes more obvious. Most of my life is over. There's not going to be another 74 years, as I surely would hope not. So we have to, it condenses the mind a bit. Oh, I've got work to do, and I'm not done yet, and I don't have that much time left. It's actually helpful. So what's really important is that we continue to cultivate our faith and our aspiration for the way, whether we're young or old, new to training, or old hands, as Empty Cloud puts it. Old hands are like that. And when we're getting old, we might not be able to sit as long or as comfortably as when we were young, but we can still nourish that aspiration. It can even become stronger as we go on, because we don't have that much time, as I said. We can still work on keeping the precepts. It never goes away. We always have to do that. We never outgrow the precepts at all. We can still work on mindfulness, even though we may find ourselves more distracted or less able to focus with our age. Don't worry. We just do our best. That's all we can do, is just do our best and not to worry, not to think I'm failing because I'm old and I sometimes get distracted or I fall asleep or whatever. We just do our best. There's no problem. And we can always still practice kindness and compassion. We can always do that. All of us can do that. We can practice wisdom, gratitude, faith, humility, all the Buddha's virtues we can still practice as we're getting old. And maybe even more so, because time is getting shorter and we don't take our life for granted anymore. That's a helpful blessing, actually, to know I don't have time to waste. Time is precious. Let's get on with it. Really helpful. Well, now Dogen's imaginary disciple asked about the idea, which is called the Shredika heresy. I won't go into it at great length, but the idea is that though the body dies, the mind lives on forever, like a soul, lives on unchanging forever. And Dogen soundly refutes this idea, as the Buddha did. The Buddha said, there is no separate unchanging self, no soul. This is radical in his day. So Dogen goes on at some length about how this is rubbish, but I won't go into all that. But in essence, our little mind does not last forever. Our body changes all the time, as we know, from the moment we're born. Our mind changes all the time, from infancy until we die, It constantly changes. We have different thoughts, different views, different values as we start to train in Buddhism. Our values change up until the time we're dying. Our mind changes all the time as our body changes. So there's nothing that's unchanging, immortal, that goes on. And as Dogen says, also, Buddhism teaches that the body and mind are one. You can't separate them, as are spirit and form. This is known clearly throughout both India and China. You can't separate body and mind. You can't say, well, the body dies, but the mind goes on. You can't have the body dying while the mind goes off somewhere else. You can't separate them. They go together. Because otherwise you're just trying to get away from life and death. Or the body may die, but I will go on forever. It's not like that. It's different from that, because there isn't a separate little undying self. And it's really hard to really grasp this. He says, understand clearly that life and death are nirvana itself, and that we cannot speak of nirvana without life and death. You're completely wrong if you think that the wisdom of the Buddhas is free from life and death. Life and death go together. We're all subject to life and death. There's part of the package of this human body. We're not trying to get away from them when we train. It's not like, I'll be saintly and then I'll never die. But Dogen talks about being free from life and death, but it's not the same as they go away. It's different. Our view changes. And he'll go into this at length when we do our chapter Shoji, which is life and death. So I won't go on at great length here, but he does say, life and death are part of Buddha nature, part of the life of Buddha. To think that birth and death should be avoided is clearly an error in Buddhism, but they are truly the means by which Buddhism is taught. If we didn't have birth and death, we wouldn't have any real motivation to train ourselves. because seeing impermanence really gets us to start looking at something deeper, something more unchanging. Look at the Buddha, as Siddhartha, before he left his home life. It was seeing an old person, a sick person, a dead person, and then a monk. That's what turned his heart around and caused him to think, oh my goodness, look at this. Here is life and death. He did not turn away. He looked it right in the eye and said, what is going on? And how can I understand this? How can we find our way through this? How can we find a freedom from suffering if everybody dies? He could see it right there. And that's what woke him up and caused him to leave home and look for answers, for which we're most grateful. And with Dogen, it was the death of his mother that caused him to see impermanence and decide to be a monk. Even at a young age, as a child, he decided this. And for many of us, impermanence is what brings us to Buddhist training. Now, the doubtful disciple of Dogen, this pretend doubtful disciple, he asked about the precepts. He says, must one who takes the practice of Zazen seriously keep the precepts strictly and purify both body and mind? As we talk about Zazen, it means our particular sitting practice, so that's to bear that in mind. So must one who takes this practice seriously keep the precepts strictly? Well, yes, we know what Dogen's going to say to that. The Buddhas and ancestors have handed down the practice of strict observance of the precepts and pure living as the rules governing Zen. Keeping the precepts strictly. This doesn't mean we become puritanical or judgmental about the precepts, or I am keeping the precepts and that person clearly is not, or I am, or I'm failing terribly, It's not the judgment thing, it's just doing our best. We don't overly do the sort of strict, I've got to be absolutely perfect, but we don't want to be loose or sloppy either. We want to be careful. We watch the mind. This is the thing, we watch the mind. It's not just a matter of what the body does. Not keeping the precepts only outwardly, but keeping them within our mind. Getting angry, we talk about this a lot. Yes, we don't want to yell at somebody, we don't want to slam the doors, and we do not want to hold on to our resentment and nurse it and make a story out of it, because that is not observing the precepts. We need to let it go, to have compassion for that anger. Not be angry about being angry, or being angry about somebody else being angry, but just have compassion and let it sit there, let it go when it wants to, but not indulge it and not feed it, Dogen continues, any who have not yet received the precepts should do so at once, and they who have broken them should repent of their wrongdoing. By so doing, they may become one with the wisdom of the Buddhas. To take the precepts and to do our best to keep them is essential if we really want to deepen our practice. And especially doing our best to keep them. Sometimes people can't take the precepts formally because we've had the COVID pandemic. We've had to miss 2 Jukais. So people want to take the precepts and they haven't been able to, but we can still keep them. And it's keeping them that's the most important thing. So when we can't take them formally, we can still take them in our heart and really dedicate ourselves to keeping them, to do our best. Repentance when we've broken a precept, he talks about. And that's essential so we may see our mistake clearly, to look clearly. What have I done? What did I do? Not to blame somebody else or just make feel bad about ourselves, but just look clearly. I made a mistake. I can do something, With compassion, to see it with compassion. Learn from it. Can I make amends? I can always learn something. Why did I do that? How did that happen? What situation did I get into that I, broke the precepts? Well, let's try to be more careful in future, and to just be sincerely sorry for what we've done, because we've caused suffering to ourselves and maybe for others as well. As Dogen says in the Shushogi, contrition before the Buddhas brings purification and salvation. True conviction and earnest endeavor. Really beautiful, It's not like, oh, you bad person. It's purification, salvation, true conviction and earnest endeavor. It clears the way for us to clear the slate and keep going. So we talk about the precepts a lot, so I won't go on at great length here, because we do talk about them in many other ways. And actually, this is one of Dogen's shorter answers. He feels it's quite clear. Of course you keep the precepts, just do it. Now our kicky imaginary disciple asked about combining practices. Is there any harm in a serious student of Zazen saying Shingon mantras or practicing Tendai training at the same time as doing Zazen? And Dogen says that the teachers he learned from in China said they'd never heard of any of the ancestors doing various practices. One should concentrate solely on one thing, he says, if one would understand the truth. We say this all the time. Just dig one deep hole. Don't make lots of little holes all over the place. Don't sort of dilute your practice by trying all these different things. Or you just have to have faith in what we do and not think something's lacking. And just as much now as in Dogen's time, this is the case. Even back then, people thought, well, maybe if I do a little Shingon mantra, that might be nice. Let's add a bit of this and a bit of that. Maybe I'll do some mantra recitation of other things, and just to kind of, cover all the bases. But he says, no, just do Zazen, have faith in that, just deepen your practice. And we need to do this too, put our faith in our meditation practice and our own training, and do it wholeheartedly. Not to combine practices. People often ask about this. Don't combine practices. Sometimes people ask about doing yoga or Tai Chi, and they're fine if we're careful that we're not to mix things up. There's many kinds of yoga, If we're careful, we don't want to do yoga meditation practice if we're doing Zazen. It just muddles things. But we can do maybe yoga, hatha yoga, stretching exercises, physical yoga, if we know what we're doing and we're careful. Tai Chi, they're fine, they're good practices to do them with mindfulness and stillness, but not to confuse things, not to try different types of meditation at the same time. Just to know what we're doing and be clear about that. Not looking for more things, thinking more is better. It doesn't help. Now our disciple says, can lay people practice Zazen, or is it for monks alone? And again, Dogen gives a short and unequivocal response. All ancestors who have clearly understood Buddhism, have taught that there is no difference between the Zazen of a man or a woman, a rich person or a poor one. He actually doesn't bother to talk about monks and lay people. He thinks it's obvious, and he talks about it later, how lay people can practice the way just as much as monks. But it does say here, clearly, that men and women can both train and realize the truth, and equally, they both have equal potential. No difference between the Zazen of a man or a woman, a rich person or a poor one. And he dedicated a whole chapter of Shobogenzo to this very topic of women can go the whole way and practice the truth. He cites always examples of women teaching Buddhism to both men and women, being deeply respected by both men and women, female monks, female lay people who really exemplify the way. And we have many examples of those in our present day, as we know. Rai Hai Tokuzui, respectful bowing, secure for you the very marrow of the way, as Reverend Hubert translates it. Respectful bowing, whether it's a man or a woman, whether you're a man or a woman, respectful bowing will secure for you the very marrow of the way, because that's respectful bowing is what really opens the door for us. No matter whether it's a male or female person who we learn from, not to think, well, what do they know? That just slams the door in our face, as it were. That's opening of the heart. But our disciple isn't quite happy with this answer. That he says, since the monks have no ties, there is nothing in the way of their practicing Zazen. But how can a busy lay person do serious training in order to reach enlightenment? We've heard this one before. All down through the centuries, people have been asking this. How can a lay person really train hard, because lay life is so busy? Can I really train seriously in lay life? So many demands on my time, so many complications. And it's a good question. And nowadays it seems like things are busier and more complicated than ever. But still it's the same thing, you know. The internet, technology, family, job, all the responsibilities, it's all still there. Well, actually, with the pandemic, some of us have found it simpler because we haven't had all that stuff, and other people have found it much harder, as we know. But still, throughout the ages, no matter what has been going on, there's this question: can a lay trainee really practice meditation and deeply train themselves and go all the way? And Dogen says, yes. And actually, monks are busy too. We're not just sitting around contemplating. We have a busy life. Those of us who are helping us, you know, we have a busy life. We're not just sitting on our duffs looking for something to do. We really can be really busy. And we do our formal meditation, and we try to bring that meditation into all the other things we do. Sometimes we forget. We get worried, we get anxious, we get crabby, we get overstressed. These all things all happen to us just as they do to other people. In some ways it's simpler being a monk because we have this constant focus before our eyes, and yet we still get distracted, we still forget, But what's really important is how we look at things, whether we were a monk or a lay person. How do we look at the things of our lives? How do we look at those seeming impediments and use them for our practice? And Dogen talks about this. He talks about these ministers and heads of state who are really, really busy, but because they made their training paramount in their life, they deepened their practice. One of them was a famous Zen master. He was a prime minister. He worked all the time, and yet at night he would study the Dharma and sit. That was his practice. We don't all do that. But to make the training paramount in our life, that's the most important thing, to use everything that comes our way for our practice, and not to think there's an obstruction. And sometimes we need to rest, sometimes we need to take a break, sometimes we need to take a retreat. Monks go on retreat. Lay trainees come on retreat. And it's really good to do that sometimes. And yet, most of our training is done right in the hurly-burly of our daily life. That's where we have to sit still, really watch our mind, watch what we do, what we say, sit still, to keep our focus, to keep our aspiration before our eyes, not to get too pulled off by, I have to do this thing or get involved in this project or all that, just to keep our purpose in front of us. Easier said than done, as he said. Not letting little things upset us, not clinging to trifles, as we said, and not insisting on our own way, that the thing has to be done perfectly my way. We can simplify. Here at the Abbey we've simplified lots of things. We've simplified our ceremonial, we've simplified many things because we have 2 monks on hospice, and this really concentrates the mind. Talking of life and death, here it is. To not get pulled off by the little things of our lives, because there are things that are much more important that we keep turning to. And it is important that we, do these little things carefully, but not thinking that they're an impediment, because it's the practice, it's how we look at them, that's the important thing. We say this all the time. And Dogen's answer, interestingly, to this question, it begins with compassion. He says, the gates of compassion have been opened wide by the Buddhas and ancestors out of their limitless love for all living beings, whether they be men or gods, lay people or monks, whoever. Men being both men and women, because if we talked about men includes both men and women. This is a beautiful response. It's compassion right from the get-go. Because of the compassion of the Buddhas and ancestors, all of us can do it. They help us. There's nothing that truly impedes us if we really want to do the training. And he, as I said, he gives examples of all these state officials who are really busy and, but still practice meditation and penetrated the way of the Buddhas and ancestors. He says, everything depends upon the will of the person involved and has nothing whatsoever to do with being either a lay person or a monk. Unequivocal response. If we're really committed to the practice, we'll do it. Nothing's going to stop us. If we're a bit half-hearted, we might say, well, I think I need to wait till things settle down a bit before I really get going, or wait till I move house, wait till I feel better, wait till I'm younger, when I'm not so busy. You can always find a reason not to do it. A million reasons. but actually we have to just do it now. And Dogen says, a person who believes that worldly work is a hindrance to Buddhism knows only that no Buddhism exists in the world, for nothing whatsoever in Buddhism can be set apart as a worldly task. It's all part of our training. Everything can be used as part of our training. Everything's part of Buddha nature. Just as Reverend Master Ji would say, sanctifying the mundane is exactly what she meant. The mundane things of our lives we sanctify by using them for our training. It sounds kind of rarefied, but actually it's just right down to earth, just doing the thing, not thinking it's a separate thing from our training, Nothing can be despised or looked down as unworthy or defiled. Look at cleaning the toilet, cleaning up cat vomit, whatever it might be, the messy things of our lives that we do, is all part of that. Nothing is outside it. Nothing. Juggling phone calls and emails and the people who come to see us is the same thing, Constantly just trying to sit still within all that and not giving a crabby response. I'm too busy, but here's another thing, and just another part of my life, another part of my practice, to do our best to sit and be patient with all of these things that come our way, whatever it might be. And we still get tired and frazzled sometimes, but to be patient with that, to have compassion for that, to take rest when we can and when we need. We're not going to be perfect, we're just trying to do our best. But it's the way we look at things that makes all the difference. Our imaginary disciple, another question. Is it still possible to gain enlightenment through Zazen in the present degenerate times of this evil world? Well, you've heard this before. People have been asking this question for hundreds of years. Things are so awful now. How can we possibly train? Even shortly after the Buddha's time, they said there's 500 years of the true Dharma, when the training will be true. Then 500 years of the counterfeit Dharma, when it's kind of gone off a bit. And then 500 years of the Dharma ending age. And people have been saying for hundreds and hundreds of years, it's the Dharma ending age. It's just awful. There's no true Dharma anymore. Well, actually, there is. Maybe all are true at once. Maybe there is the true Dharma. Maybe there is also the counterfeit Dharma. We've seen it. And maybe it's also the Dharma ending age, but there's no point in saying, it's the Dharma ending age. Too bad. Doesn't help. Let's just get on with the practice. Not worry about, how can we still do it in this degenerate time? We have to do it now, because when are we going to do it? If things always seem to be getting worse, but I think it's always been this way. It always seems like, oh God, everything's just getting worse. Now we can see it more because we have the internet. But things have always been pretty bad in many parts of the world, in many parts of people's lives. It's samsara, the world of patient endurance. It's called that for a good reason. It's not an easy life for anybody. And we have to practice the Dharma for that very reason, not to say, it's too hard. Can we still do it? Not really, it's too hard. No, we have to do it now, because if you don't do it now, when are we going to do it? You're not going to wait for the Dharma ending age to go away, It's right here. So, we don't wait for better times. We just do it right now. Train ourselves now. The worse the worse the world seems to be, the more we need to train to help ourselves, to help other beings. We can't fix the whole world. We can do something about ourselves, and that does help the world in unseen ways, as we say. And Dogen says, once again, don't rely on worldly knowledge. Don't rely on scholarship, writings or sayings. Just do the practice. In true faith, so what you really need is true faith in the practice. And we nourish that faith by doing it. It's not something we're waiting for to, as I said, waiting for faith to descend on us. We practice it, and that nourishes it. He says, anyone who trains with true faith will be enlightened equally with everybody else, without differentiation between the clever or the stupid. It's for all of us. And training and enlightenment are one. As we train, we're practicing our enlightenment. We don't need to wait for some special experience or some special state or some special wisdom. We just have to do it now. Don't compare ourselves with others or doubt our ability. We haven't got time for that. We all have the ability. We all have innate wisdom. Just do it now. That's what he says.